Stonney Rivers in 2013. Washington Department of Corrections. Via Associated Press, Stonney Rivers walked out of the Cedar Creek Corrections Center in Littlerock, Wash, in January 2015 with a rare second chance. The governor had commuted the life sentence he received in 1996 after his sixth robbery conviction. But now Mr. Rivers again faces the possibility of life in prison after, the police said, he fatally shot a 24-year-old man in a motel room outside Seattle on November 2 during a drug deal. Prosecutors said the killing was the violent culmination of a series of assaults and thefts by Mr. Rivers since his release. Rivers continues to commit crimes, even when he is on community custody and even after being given a once-in-a-lifetime second chance through a governor's commutation. John B. Castleton, Jr., a prosecutor in King County, said in court records, "He does not obey court orders." The police arrested Mr. Rivers on an unrelated theft charge on November 11, 2017. During an interview with investigators, he said he went to the motel on November 2 to buy crystal meth from a man, but denied that he killed anyone, the police said. Prosecutors charged him and another man, Thanayas Swafford, 47, with murder. Mr. Rivers, 50, is being held without bail at the King County Jail. Lawyers representing the two could not be reached for comment. Prosecutors portray Mr. Rivers in court documents as a violent career criminal whose robberies and assaults were interrupted only by a 20-year stay in prison. Since 1985, he has been convicted of 6 felonies and at least 21 misdemeanors, including several assault charges, prosecutors said. The story of Mr. Rivers, in some ways, also tells the story of Washington state's struggles with violent crime and prison overcrowding in recent decades. At the center of his case is the state's 1993 anti-crime legislation known as the Three Strikes Law, which was hailed at the time as an answer to rising crime but is derided by some today for disproportionately sending minorities to prison. It automatically sentences some felons with 3 convictions to life in prison without parole. Only the governor can release them. The law was on the books in 1996 when Mr. Rivers mugged a man in a hotel room near Seattle and stole $1,000. He was convicted of robbery, his 6th felony, and received an automatic life sentence under the law. About 300 people in the state have received such life sentences, including his brother, half-brother and stepfather. During Mr. Rivers' years in prison, the inmate population in Washington boomed, growing by nearly 50% to 17,500 last year. To ease congestion, state officials considered drastic measures in recent years, including shipping inmates to other states and releasing others through clemency. That was the backdrop when Mr. Rivers went before the state's Clemency and Pardons Board in 2013. Numerous inmates before him had their clemency appeals denied, but the board members approved Mr. Rivers' request. Then in her final days in office in 2013, Gov. Christine Gregoire signed off on his release. Ms. Gregoire, a Democrat, said in a statement on Tuesday that she approved his clemency in part because he had spent 20 years in prison for a crime that typically carried a 2 to 3 year sentence. Based on these recommendations and the facts available at the time, to include his performance while in prison, I conditionally commuted Mr. Rivers' sentence to his time served subject to compliance with 21 different conditions, she said in a statement. The allegations against him suggest that he violated these conditions and should be returned to prison for the rest of his life. Daniel T. Satterberg, the King County prosecuting attorney and who had also recommended commuting the sentence, faulted the 1993 legislation for disproportionate sentences handed out in the early days of the law, including in robbery cases like Mr. Rivers. His extreme sentence was given out to a highly disproportionate percentage of young African American men, around 80%, Mr. Satterberg told KIRO-TV. In an interview on Tuesday, Mr. Satterberg said his prosecutors no longer seek life without parole sentences for robberies like the one for which Mr. Rivers received a life term. He said he had supported clemency petitions from 16 inmates in the past decade, 13 of whom were sentenced under the 1993 law. Those 16 inmates were all granted commutation, he said, and only 2 of them were later arrested on new charges. He noted that the rate of recidivism for those cases was significantly lower than the state's rate for prisoners released through other means. My support for their release after they served 20 years was based on the need to reconcile the old practice and the new, Mr. Satterberg said on Tuesday. A few months before he was released in January 2015, Mr. Rivers suggested to a news reporter that he had changed for the better during prison. "We did wrong. We were wrong. We were rambunctious," he told the Northwest News Network in 2014. After his release, he completed 2 years of community custody, but then, according to the police, squandered his freedom. Over the summer, he was charged with assault and violating an order not to contact someone. And on the morning of November 2, he entered room 18 of the Golden Kent Motel in Kent, a suburb about 15 miles south of downtown Seattle. Within 45 seconds of arriving there, the police said, Mr. Rivers pulled a handgun out from his waistband and fatally shot David Cabrera in the face. Mr. Rivers then grabbed the man's backpack and ran out of the room and hopped into a friend's silver Lexus sedan, the authorities said. Mr. Rivers told detectives he went to the Golden Kent Motel to buy drugs, according to court records, but not to jack, not to hurt, especially not to hurt or kill anyone.